Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. So I'll say this about Anthony Joshua. I just saw his demolition of Gary Cornish. Right now, I'll say this. The excitement about him is palpable. Right? This does feel like Mike Tyson. Right? You're seeing punching power that's outsized to the point where when he hits a guy, another professional fighter, and that fighter hits the canvas and looks back up at him, you think to yourself, has this guy ever been hit this hard before in his life? Right? Joshua's punching power does look outsized. But let me say what I've said before about Joshua, and it needs to be said here. Let's get past the punching power. And I'll agree, he does great work with the counter left. He throws a right hand that drops Cornish the second time. But other than his punching power and countering a guy who insists on being right in front of him in the pocket, what exactly is it that Anthony Joshua does that has convinced any of us that he's ready for elite level heavyweight competition? Understand, and I know this video already is longer than the fight, but understand, when Cornish comes out and is throwing a pretty good jab, it looks to me as if Anthony Joshua is completely, and I mean completely, unprepared for it. In other words, he's getting hit with it. His hands are like this. He looks stiff to me. Looks like he's having a problem with the jab. Now, I'll say this. We know that at the higher end of the game, a guy throwing a jab is not going to linger right in front of you in the pocket. I think we all understand one of the easiest ways to get knocked out in boxing is to throw a lazy jab, which leaves you unprotected, right? And then to have that jab linger. Right? Now, here's what I didn't see from Anthony Joshua. And I know I'm going to get a lot of thumbs down. I made a video about Joseph Parker, who's very much like Anthony Joshua. Outsized punching power, unbeaten fighter. And I know there are many of you who are looking for the next big thing in boxing and look at these guys' highlights. And they're tremendous, right? Bowie Tupu hits the canvas face first, right? Here, Gary Cornish, after the second knockdown, the camera actually looks at him looking down on the canvas, and he looks like a beaten man, right? I understand the highlights are tremendous, right? That these guys are blowing out guys. But here I have a young fighter in Anthony Joshua getting hit with a jab, and I don't see him bending at the waist. In other words, there's no bounce like I saw with Mike Tyson. Right? He's a big man. He's wide, broad-shouldered. Looked like he could barely get out of the way of the jab. And let's just say the guy throwing the jab, now I do believe Gary Cornish looked good the brief time he was vertical. But I'm not going to confuse him with someone like Larry Holmes. Right? Guys who throw great jabs understand they can't just let the guy hit them with a counter after he throws a jab. Right? Because that's what happens here, and it's bad because Cornish, of course, somehow while throwing a jab gets hit in the face with the counter. Right? Let's just say one wonders when we're going to see a guy against Anthony Joshua able to hit him with the jab and not be right in front of him for the counter. Right? Understand, when Vladimir Klitschko is hitting you with the jab, he's a tall man who is using the jab to create space. You don't see a lot of guys able to just time the jab and then come in and hit him in the face. Many Vladimir Klitschko fights don't have him getting hit in the face for several rounds. Here, Gary Cornish, I'll give Cornish credit for coming in really front foot oriented. He's the one who's moving forward behind a jab. But you understand that Anthony Joshua's best chance of beating you is by KO, right? Because this guy, I'm not sure if he's even gone to the 4th round in a fight yet. You understand that most of Joshua's experience comes from early KOs. So I don't understand why a guy can't combine a jab with a back foot game and force Joshua to find him. Lord knows I'm not convinced, looking at this fight, if Joshua has the kind of reflexes or head movement to dodge a jab. I mean, I'll agree, after Cornish comes in and lands a few jabs, Joshua then jumps outside of the jab and hits him with the counter. Okay, fine. Didn't look that elusive to me. Right? I get the feeling. I definitely get the feeling. If there were a bunch of fighters right now, Tyson Fury among them, perhaps Vladimir Klitschko, we're looking at footage of this fight and they're saying, whoa, you know, Junior didn't look that comfortable when this jab was in his face. Right? I'll even say this, you know, a real fighter, Alexander Povetkin, you often see him, and Povetkin has punching power on the side of the pocket, not in the pocket, not right in front of his opponent. So, I know the world right now is saying, oh my God, this guy is picking up regional titles and this guy has set himself up. I know Joshua in interviews has bought into his own hype and talks about getting a title in 18 months and all this other stuff. Like Joseph Parker, this guy is still, in my opinion, an unknown commodity. How many of you knew of Gary Cornish before this fight was announced? I can tell you the first time I saw Gary Cornish in a ring was at the beginning of this fight. Right? I can tell you too, as I was watching the fight, I thought to myself, why is Gary Cornish staying right in front of Joshua with a jab like this before he gets caught? Right? So, if you're going to try to beat a Joseph Parker or an Anthony Joshua without showing us some foot speed, good luck. That's what Gary Cornish tried to do. Let me say this too, and it has to be said, and I know it's an unpopular position. Right? We want to believe in heroes. It's a heavyweight title fight. You have to expect, in heavyweight title fights, guys to get dazed and confused at times. Now, both knockdowns are legitimate knockdowns. I didn't see a slip. Gary Cornish obviously gets hit with some shots, goes down. Right? The first knockdown is a one-punch knockdown. Right? Now, my point to you is simply this. How could you stop the fight when Gary Cornish gets off the canvas and has beaten the count? Right? For all I know, maybe Gary Cornish has a back foot game. He certainly showed a good enough jab where you thought, you know what, this guy looks like he has the capability to work from distance. Right? Now, I know we view Joshua as some giant killer and stuff like that. Who really has he fought besides Kevin Johnson? Right? I'm surprised they stopped the fight, especially since Cornish looked lucid. In other words, you know, this ref, would not have allowed the recent Adonis Stevenson fight to continue on after the first knockdown, which was more brutal than any knockdown in this fight. Right? Cornish did hit the canvas twice. This is the biggest fight of his career. He should have been allowed to continue. He looked lucid to me. Right? Let me say this too. The first knockdown, it looked like he hadn't fully recovered. Excuse me, the second knockdown, it looked like he hadn't fully recovered from the first knockdown. Right? Give the guy an opportunity to try to make it out of the round. Understand he has a minute break at the end of the 3-minute round. Now, sure, he had a minute and a half to go, but the guy wasn't out on his feet, not by a long shot. Not only that, in the beginning of the fight, the interesting part, the first 20 seconds of the fight, he actually had Joshua backing up confused. I know I'm going to get booed, but you got to be kidding me. A guy hits the canvas against Anthony Joshua and is in the kind of shape Gary Cornish is in, and you're going to stop the fight? I don't like it. So yeah, Joshua did win the fight. He did show outsized punching power. He did show an ability to throw a nice short hook on a guy standing right in front of him in the pocket. Whoop-de-doo. This doesn't show me that he's remotely ready to hop in the ring with, a Povetkin, a Fury, a Klitschko. Let me say this too. Let's talk about another British fighter quickly. The thing with David Haye is that David Haye didn't stay right in front of you like Gary Cornish is in this fight. Right? David Haye is outside. Then he jumps in. And I think it's safe to say David Haye has much faster hands than Anthony Joshua. So just understand, as the world right now is titillated by Anthony Joshua, I'm not even sure if he's the third best heavyweight in the United Kingdom. Right? This is a young guy with a big punch who looks stiff to me. Doesn't bend at the waist. Isn't bouncing like Tyson. Isn't small and hard to find like Tyson. Who's been fighting guys who feel a need to stand right in front of him. That's what I saw. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here. Let me say this too about Dillian White. And I appreciate his comments. I actually liked the scene at the press conference where he said, "Look, man, I know you. Stop being fake. What's this all about?" My one concern with Dillian White, who is training with Jonathan Banks, who is the trainer for Vladimir Klitschko. And you need to be aware of that because, as you can imagine, Klitschko is getting all kinds of information about Anthony Joshua and all kinds of suggestion from his trainer, who's even training other fighters to fight this young man. Right? Dillian White, after the fight, is hanging out with Johnny Nelson, who was a cruiserweight, and Glenn McCorry. Right? Neither guy a heavyweight. And Dillian White didn't look appreciably bigger than either of them. Right? So I do hope that Dillian White isn't planning on staying in the pocket and is somehow able to, even though he's physically smaller than Anthony Joshua by quite a bit, is actually planning on moving around the ring and keeping Joshua turning. Because Joshua looks like a big piece of lumber to me. I don't think he's that fluid. I don't think he's that flexible. Anyway, that's how I see it. Maybe one day he becomes champ. But let's just say, right now, to me, it looks like a bubble. During the telecast, somebody on Sky actually said, how many heavyweights in the world right now do you feel are better than him? Understand, even flawed heavyweights, in my opinion, like Deontay Wilder, can hit you from so far away that they'd be hard for Anthony Joshua to find. Right? I would say that there are a few heavyweights out there better than this guy. Right? I mean, all we've seen is this guy with guys standing right in front of him, and the guys in front of him aren't exactly contenders. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for stopping by.